Like I would like to start by thanking the Disability Council of Austria for the kind invitation to this important event. I would like to thank them for organizing this event on the European Accessibility Act. Since the entering into application of the Act in 28 June this year, it is really important to increase its awareness and the knowledge about the content of the Act for its correct application. The potential of the European Accessibility Act to improve the participation of persons with disabilities in society is really great. By having products and services that are more accessible in the market, we will increase the participation in everyday lives, support independent living, increase access to education and employment, and as well as to public and private services. Let me say that the Act has got a strong digital component requiring computers and operating systems, requiring telephones, tablets, TVs, set-top boxes, self-service terminals, and e-books as products to be placed in a market only when they comply with the accessibility requirements of the Act. The Act also requires that certain services, telecommunications, access to audiovisual media services, certain elements of transport services, including the provision of information, tickets, electronic tickets, and websites and their applications to be accessible. It also requires that e-commerce is provided in Europe, taking account and being compliant with the accessibility requirements of this directive, as well as having more accessible e-books in the market. Now, indeed, the Act has got a very strong digital components, and this is really to reflect the shift that we are seeing today in everyday activity in society. Critical now is really to see that the products and the services placed in the market indeed comply with the Act. We need to see that economic operators have the capacity to implement the requirements. And to that end, what we need is really to support with training, support with guidance, support with standards. The Commission has asked the European Standardization Organization to develop standards that are supporting the implementation of the accessibility requirements of the directive in terms of ICT, in terms of the built environment, design for all approach, but also key new areas like answering emergency communications to the European number 112, also in an accessible way, or having non-digital information being accessible, or the supports centers that these services provide, whether we are talking about banking or we are talking about transport, so that they are accessible for persons with disabilities. What is critical also now is that market surveillance authorities and authorities responsible for compliance of services are also stepping up their competencies in order to be able to check the compliance of the products and the services, but also receive complaints or concerns from users and consumers and act on them. It is really important that support is given also to these public authorities. To that end, the Commission has launched the Accessible EU Center, which I think is behind also the organization of the event of today, to increase capacity in Europe and to provide that support through trainings, meetings, guidance material, detailed reports, and other documentation. What is ahead of us now? Well, we are focusing our efforts now at the Commission in a number of activities. First, the checking the compliance of national laws with the uh, provisions of the directive. The transposition really needs to be done correct in terms of completeness. All the provisions need to be there, but also in terms of correctness. Each and the provisions need to really reflect the text of and the spirit of the directive in national law, so that we have really good guidance for those that need to implement the directive. Then we need to support enforcement. We are working for the creation of the working group that the directive requires, in which these market surveillance authorities and authorities responsible for compliance services will come together, also with organizations of persons with disabilities and other stakeholders, and discuss possible challenges, their views on complaints that might be received, but also how best to apply the provisions of the directive. To that end, again, what is ahead of us is the finalization of the standards. The Commission had really asked the European standardization organizations to deliver this year. There are some delays, but let me tell you that those delays are not critical for the application of the directive. The accessibility requirements of the directive are clear enough and are understandable enough in order to be directly applicable. So applying those requirements is at the end the priority after 28 June this year, and raising awareness about the directive and its obligation is really a daily activity that is supported by many stakeholders like the ones that we have today. So all that is left for me at this moment is to wish you a fruitful conference, and that the efforts being done by all of you will really result in better and more accessible products and services to achieve a more inclusive European Union. I thank you for your attention.